In 1200 of the Second Age, a being in a fair form arrives in Eregion, and the elves there receive him gladly, hearkening not to the messengers from Lindon bidding them beware. For in Eregion the Noldor desire to increase the skill and subtlety of their works, being not at peace in their hearts, wishing to stay in Middle-earth and yet to enjoy the bliss and perfect memory of Valinor. The fair being takes to himself the name of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, posing as an emissary of the Valar, sent by them to Middle-earth to remain there and provide aid to the elves. The only person in the realm not to be fooled by Annatar is Galadriel, who treats him with scorn. Her wisdom proves true, as this being is none other than Sauron in disguise, secretly seeking to persuade the elves to his service. The elven smiths hearken to him, and they become enamored of the great knowledge he can impart, and they learn from him many things and grow mighty in craft. Celebrimbor himself, being unaware of Annatar's true identity, is willing to cooperate with him, but for reasons of his own. But Sauron had better fortune with the Noldor of Eregion, and especially with Celebrimbor, who desired in his heart to rival the skill and fame of Feanor. So he concentrated on Celebrimbor, and soon had all the smiths of Eregion under his influence. In the nature of Middle-earth, it is noted that when Sauron is admitted by Celebrimbor and the Noldorin smiths, and they begin to learn from him, the story of Feanor is in a sense repeated. This likely refers to when the Noldor of Valinor fell to the lies of Melkor thousands of years ago, and strife arose between them, and for the first time they began the forging of weapons. Without Galadriel or Celeborn's knowledge, Sauron covertly collaborates with Celebrimbor and the Gwathi Myrdain, learning all the secrets of the elven smiths. Sauron used all his arts upon Celebrimbor and his fellow smiths, who had formed a society or brotherhood very powerful in Eregion, the Gwathi Myrdain, but he worked in secret, unknown to Galadriel and Celeborn. Before long, Sauron had the Gwathi Myrdain under his influence, for at first they had great profit from his instruction in secret matters of their craft. So great became his hold on the Myrdain that at length he persuaded them to revolt against Galadriel and Celeborn and to seize power in Eregion. And that was at some time between 1350 and 1400 of the Second Age. Thereupon Galadriel with her daughter Celebrian depart from Eregion, and through Khazad-dûm they come to Lorinand, later known as Lothlorien. Celeborn, distrusting the dwarves and desiring not to enter their mansions, remains behind in Eregion, disregarded by Celebrimbor. For roughly 300 years, Celebrimbor and the other elven smiths received teaching from Annatar, until in circa 1500 they reached the height of their skill. Thus the Gwathi Myrdain, having already forged an unknown number of lesser rings, begins the forging of the rings of power. Soon Sauron, still under his fair guise, departs from Eregion. Eventually, the elven smiths managed to create 16 rings of power. Celebrimbor is still unaware of the true intentions of Annatar, the seduction of the Eldar and the use of the rings of power as means of dominating the minds of their bearers. Due to this and Sauron's part in their making, unbeknownst to Celebrimbor, the rings are corrupted and tainted by the Dark Lord. But sometime during the same century, Celebrimbor alone begins the construction of his own valuable work, the one that will also be his greatest, the 3 rings of the Elves. With these rings, the Elves desire not strength or domination or hoarded wealth, but understanding, making and healing. For this reason, Celebrimbor makes them not as weapons of war or conquest, but with the power of preserving all things unstained by the griefs of time. Around the year 1590, the 3 rings are completed, the last of the rings of power to be made and the ones that possess the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya and Vilya they are named, the rings of fire and of water and of air, set with ruby and adamant and sapphire. These rings, although forged with the lore and counsel of Sauron, are never touched by his hand, and therefore they remain unsullied and uncorrupted. Approximately 10 years later, Sauron secretly forges the One Ring in Orodruin, the Mount Doom in the land of Mordor, with the purpose of ruling all the Elven rings, and because their power is very great, Sauron passes into his ring much of his strength and will. And in this way all the rings of the Elves, even the 3 rings of Celebrimbor, become subject to the Master Ring, and therefore they are bound to last only so long as the One Ring will last. So it comes to pass that Sauron puts on the One Ring, and with it he perceives all the things that are done by means of the other rings, and he can see and govern the very thoughts of the Elves that wear them. But Celebrimbor hears Sauron from afar, and so the Dark Lord's evil purposes are revealed. The Elf Lord at last perceives the trap into which he has fallen, and he repents, and revolts against the Lord of the Rings. But the Elves were not so likely to be caught. As soon as Sauron set the One Ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived that he would be master of them and of all that they wrought. Then in anger and fear they took off the rings, but he, finding that he was betrayed and that the Elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath. So it is that when Sauron learns of Celebrimbor's revolt, the fair disguise which he has put on falls, and he is finally unmasked as a new Dark Lord. Roughly 5 years later, in order to invade Eriador and besiege Eregion, Sauron starts gathering armies in the east, while the leaders of the Elves and men prepare for his assault. Now Celebrimbor, although having accepted Sauron for what he posed to be, has remained uncorrupt in heart or faith, and upon perceiving his designs and discovering the creation of the One Ring, he does not remain idle. Around the year 1693, seeking guidance, he leaves Eregion and travels to Lorinand, looking for the wisdom of Galadriel. In Lorien, Celebrimbor takes counsel once more with her. During Celebrimbor's dwelling there, he and Galadriel contemplate undoing the Rings of Power. They should have destroyed all the Rings of Power at this time, but they failed to find the strength. Galadriel counseled him that the 3 rings of the Elves should be hidden, never used and dispersed, far from Eregion where Sauron believed them to be. Celebrimbor follows the counsel of the Lady Galadriel, and thus he commits the 3 rings to Elvish guardians to keep them hidden from Sauron. For of all the Rings of Power, it is the 3 that Sauron most desires to possess. At this time, Celebrimbor gives Nenya, the chief of the 3, to Galadriel. He then proceeds in sending the other 2 rings to Lindon, entrusting them to Gil-galad. Upon receiving the rings, Gil-galad gives Narya, the Red Ring, to Círdan, Lord of the Grey Havens, and he keeps for himself Vilya, the mightiest of the 3. The Elvish guardians conceal the rings and they never use them openly while Sauron holds the ruling ring. Furthermore, it is possible that the Elven Smiths of Eregion offer one of the Rings of Power to Durin III, the king of Khazad-dûm. This interpretation, though found in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, is one of many, and we are not told if it is indeed Celebrimbor himself who bestows this ring on the king of the dwarves. Now Sauron, having mastered his armies, comes against the Elves with open war. He moves over Calenardon, the land that would later be known as Rohan, and in the year 1695 he invades Eriador, beginning the war of the Elves and Sauron and demanding that all the rings be delivered to him, since the Elves would not have attained to their making without his teaching. A force from Lindon under Elrond Half-Elven is sent by Gil-galad to Eregion in order to help defend the realm of the Noldor. As Sauron's scouts and vanguard are approaching, Celeborn, who is still in the city, manages to make a sortie and drive them back, joining his force to that of Elrond. But they are unable to return to Eregion, for the host of Sauron is far greater than theirs. At last the attackers break into Eregion with ruin and devastation, and the realm is laid waste. They reach the chief object of Sauron's assault, the house of the Myrdain, but Celebrimbor, desperate, himself withstands Sauron on the steps of the great door of the Myrdain and defends Eregion heroically. In the end, the Elf Lord is grappled and taken captive, and the house of the Myrdain, where the smiths and the treasures of the Noldor lie, is ransacked. There Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Myrdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Then Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the 7 were bestowed. This Celebrimbor revealed because neither the 7 nor the 9 did he value as he valued the 3. The 7 and the 9 were made with Sauron's aid, whereas the 3 were made by Celebrimbor alone with a different power and purpose. Seeing that Celebrimbor withholds any other information from him, the Dark Lord personally slays the Elf Lord cruelly. What happens to Celebrimbor's dead body afterwards is terrifying. Concerning the 3 rings, Sauron could learn nothing from Celebrimbor, and he had him put to death. But he guessed the truth that the 3 had been committed to Elvish guardians, and that must mean to Galadriel and Gil-galad. In black anger, he turned back to battle, and bearing as a banner Celebrimbor's body hung upon a pole, sawed through with orc arrows, he turned upon the forces of Elrond. So it is that the life of the great Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor, comes to a horrible end. Eventually the Elves, with the aid of the Númenóreans, manage to defeat Sauron and utterly rout him away from their lands. But from that time, war never ceases between the Elves and Sauron. Although Celebrimbor suffers a tragic death like the rest of the House of Feanor, his renowned works are much to the benefit of the free peoples. The 3 rings of the Elves, Celebrimbor's greatest creation, will remain forever out of Sauron's reach. Many centuries later, Narya will be given by Círdan to Gandalf in order to help him with his task of uniting the Elves and men of Middle-earth against the tyranny of the Dark Lord Sauron. With the other 2 rings, even after more than 4,000 years since the death of Celebrimbor will pass, the Eldar will still be able to ward off the decays of time in their own realms and postpone the weariness of the world. With Vilya and Nenya on their fingers, in Imladris and in Lothlorien, Elrond and Galadriel will defend and preserve the high elven lore and beauty. Hence, thanks to Celebrimbor's mighty works, the High Elves will endure the fading that the changes of time bring, even unto the War of the Ring, and they will guide the free peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron until his ultimate destruction. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one on the Homely House. Namarie.